Welcome to Something Personal. I'm Amy Liberta, the editorial manager at Palisades Hudson Financial Group. Depending on your temperament, you may be looking forward to retirement, worried about retirement, or even dreading retirement. But regardless of how you feel, none of us can keep working forever, even in a job we love. Navigating major transitions involves logistical hurdles, but also emotional ones. Today, I'm sitting down with a couple of my colleagues and also welcoming a guest to talk about how to navigate these changes with grace and confidence. First, I'm happy to have Eric Meermann back with me for the first time in season 3. Eric is a senior vice president here at Palisades Hudson, responsible for firm-wide professional staff development, as well as supervising the staff at the Stamford, Connecticut office where he's based and serving our clients across the country. He's also among the authors of our book, Looking Ahead, Life, Family, Wealth, and Business After 55. Eric, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Amy. Glad to be here.
Next, I'm always happy to have Paul Jacobs return to Something Personal. Paul is Palisades Hudson's managing vice president, overseeing the entirety of our firm's client service operations from his home base in Atlanta. He also continues to work directly with our clients nationwide and is another of the authors of Looking Ahead. Nice to have you back, Paul.
Thanks, Amy. Great to be here.
And I'm excited to welcome Andrea Maizes to the podcast. Andrea is a certified executive and retirement coach based in South Florida. She works with clients who are contemplating or navigating significant transitions in their lives or careers, helping them to manage change both personally and professionally. Andrea is also the author of the newsletter, The Next Edit, which is available on Substack. Andrea, welcome to Something Personal.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So fresh off that introduction, Andrea, I thought we might start with letting you just describe what you do in your own words a little bit. So what does an executive and retirement coach's day-to-day look like?
Well, I prevent people from making terrible mistakes. That's how I look at it. Seriously. I think that what I do as a retirement coach plays into what I do as an executive coach. Executives in general don't like to think about retiring. They think they're going to live forever and they're going to work forever. But everybody plans for retirement as it relates to their financial situation, but nobody really thinks, what am I going to actually do when I retire? Or how am I going to live my life? So I work at the intersection of those two things, helping senior folks figure it out. What are they going to do when they retire so that they do retire? Because many of them hang on way longer than they should because they don't know what they're going to do. So I take people through a process that helps them figure that out. It can be painful because they have to really face a lot of different things. So I'd say that's the best way to describe what I do. I help them transition from one thing to something else.
And how did you start doing this kind of work? Was it a sudden change for you, or was it a more gradual evolution of what you do?
Well, I was one of those executives, except I did it the hard way. I took a nosedive off the corporate ladder. Literally, I spent 30 years in HR. I was a CHRO at a very large company during COVID, so chief HR officer, trying to herd the cats, all 30,000 of them in 7 countries during COVID. It was not fun. And in October of 21, I decided, I think I'm tired. I think I'm done. I'm just done. I'm going to retire. I'd never thought about that before, but approaching my mid-60s, and it's time to think about it. And I'm like, all right, I'm done. That was it. We sold the company. I was able to take some money off the table, which was a nice thing. And I told my boss, I'm out. See ya. I hired my replacement and I left. And then I went home and then I cleaned out a lot of closets. And then I did a lot of doctor's appointments. And then one day I woke up and there was nothing on my calendar. And I absolutely freaked out. I mean, literally freaked out. My husband will tell you I went into the abyss. I didn't know what to do with myself because I didn't realize how much of my identity was tied up in what I was doing. So I liken it to when you're building a house, there's a structural beam. There's something in the middle of the house holding it up. For me, that was work. And when I pulled out that beam, everything fell in on itself. And I hadn't realized that work was my identity. It was my schedule. It was my social circle. It was everything. So everything disappeared all at once. And it was traumatizing. So I said to myself, I can't be the only one going through this. There's 11 million baby boomers retiring every day. So I started doing some research and I found a retirement coach. She, of course, was 45 years old. So I thought, what does this chick know about retirement? But I called her and ended up working with her. And she helped me clarify, what I could be doing with the skills I had and what new skills I wanted. So I worked with her for several months and realized that there's this unique intersection helping founders and executives intentionally plan for what happens to them when they retire. And that's sort of how I got into it. It's like, trying to prevent others from making a terrible, the mistake that I made.
A question on that. Is there a big overlap between your career in human resources and coaching? Did those skills translate?
Very much so. A lot of my job towards the end of my career was coaching executives, on the ground in different offices, right? Executive teams. So there was a lot of overlap. The top, obviously, the subject matter is a little different. But where I have an advantage that some other coaches don't is there is a succession planning piece of this also for an executive. Or a founder. I do work with a lot of founders, so they can't just walk away. Neither can most CEOs or other senior executives. So there's the planning for my replacement piece of it, which is an HR function, right? Who are you going to hire? How are you going to onboard them? And then while you're doing that, how can you prepare for your next version of you, what you're going to do, your next chapter. So there definitely helped me, being an HR person, being able to bridge those two worlds.
I read in preparing for this episode that you also do executive bridge coaching. Is that what you're talking about there with the succession planning?
Yeah, it's bridging that gap. So I'm a leader or a founder and I want to retire. Maybe in 2 years, maybe in 5 years. What do I have to do to prepare for that? Right? What has to happen for me to be able to walk out? And then what am I going to do when I walk out so that I don't drive everyone who's still in the business crazy because I have nothing to do. So it's the dual ends of that.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit on a previous season episode with Larry Elkin, our founder, who I know you know, about sort of the both logistical side of making sure you have a long enough runway to plan for that, but also the emotional side with a founder that seems particular. I mean, I'm not to say that CEOs who aren't founders don't have an emotional attachment, but I have to imagine that some of the coaching has to do with, letting your baby go if you're a founder who's put all this blood, sweat, and tears into it.
Yeah. 100% letting your baby go. But I also think that, society has a very narrow view of retirement. The way you look, if you look on TV, everyone is walking on the beach, they're gardening, they're taking care of their grandchildren. And apparently a lot of them are also taking, never mind, I won't go there. But they're, it's all the same view of retirement. And that's not what it is anymore. It doesn't have to be that. It could be whatever you want it to be. And what I have found is most senior people that retire, they end up maintaining some sort of work. Maybe they don't work in what they used to do. Maybe they do coaching. Maybe they are investors. Maybe they, open up a bakery. I've had, it depends on what they want to do and how much they want to do it for. So you don't have to stop working. You just want to rethink how much of your time you want to spend working and what do you want to fill the rest of your time with? And how do you want to create a life that's meaningful for you in your next chapter?
Yeah, I will kick it to Paul and Eric if they have any more specific examples. But from the editorial manager side, I'll mention when we were putting together the most recent edition of our book, Looking Ahead, I had to really fight as far as like getting a cover design. Those gardenings, those walking on the beach, when you work with a designer and they say, oh, it's a book about over 55, like that's immediately where all of the samples go. And, nothing against gardening. Gardening is lovely, but it seems like, the people that you work with, and I'm sure the people that my colleagues here work with have other goals as well.
They are not gardening. Most of them are not gardening. They're still maintaining some sort of work, doing something. Sometimes it's a passion project. Sometimes it's volunteerism. Sometimes it's actual work. They're doing angel funding for companies. I mean, they're doing all different types of things. They're just doing it maybe 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week. And they have the flexibility that they need to be able to build their life. I want to see my grandkids. I want to travel. I want to do other things. So they're putting together what's called a portfolio life, which is a really interesting term. It's piecing together things that make you happy into a life. And the life is, full time all day, but it's not one job all the time.
And I know when I retire, gardening will not be part of it for me. So there's at least one of us. I had a question for you, Andrea. I know that, from my own experience working with clients and also just friends and family, retirement outcomes there's a spectrum of outcomes from just totally smooth transition and just one day you're working and the next you're not and it's totally fine and you're happy and you're content, to it's a disaster. You fall off the cliff. It can be depressing. You lose purpose. Mm-hmm. And even if there wasn't attempts to kind of plan ahead, it's not a good thing at all. So I'm curious, who are there personality types that could benefit more from this kind of work? Or is this something you think every executive, if someone has reached that level, should be, working with someone to really plan ahead and avoid falling off that cliff? I don't know if it's everybody or just more of a subset, who benefits from this kind of work?
Type A crazy people. Like me.
There you go.
People who maybe like you, people who have really built their life around their work. I was one of those. I mean, I was all about if you asked me, well, who are you? I would tell you what I did for a living. When people said, no, but who are you? What do you like to do? I'm like, I like to work. Right. So I really did love my job, love to work. And I think there are some people that build their life around work and there's others that don't. And the ones that don't are a lot more, it's easier for them. So they already were playing golf or pickleball or mahjong or doing pottery, all of which I tried, by the way, all of which I almost killed myself and everyone else I was with. And trust me, on the pottery thing, not for me. So, I tried a lot of different things trying to fit into that mold, right? That I'm going to play tennis, golf. It just wasn't satisfying for me. So I think it depends on your nature to begin with and what you're doing before you retire. So maybe you want to do more of those things, but I wasn't one of those people who had a lot of hobbies. I have 2 children. My kids left and I was like, oh, they're gone. Where'd they go? I'm exaggerating, but my point is the empty nest wasn't a crisis for me the way it is for some moms that stay at home because I had my work. So my crisis came later.
A follow-up question on that having to do with timeline. Mm-hmm. When do you recommend starting to think about these things? Some people decide when they step down and they kind of have a plan and a schedule. Some people, the decision is made for them and it can be abrupt. Yeah. So what do you say when someone asks, when is the right time to start doing this work?
When you think you have enough money saved, or you will, because that's a given. You can't retire if you can't support yourself in retirement. So I think I always say to people, make sure that your finances are in order and then you can start thinking about it. And then you can think, so sometimes that's 2 years, sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes it's longer, depending upon what the financial situation is. So, that's like table stakes. If you don't have enough money to do it, you can't do it. So that's sort of my bellwether. Can you live a life that you want to live financially before you start thinking about what you're going to do when you retire? Does that answer your question? I think it's different for everyone, but that's the key.
Yeah. And now you're speaking our language because, this is a big part of what we do is working with people with retirement planning. For us, a lot of the time that means crunching numbers and, analyzing dollars and cents to try to confirm that there is a clear path, to life expectancy and beyond. There's certainly, plenty of work to be done that does not involve crunching numbers and dollars and cents. But, that's something that we are able to help a lot of our clients with, just getting that peace of mind, knowing that they're on the right track. Or if they're not on the right track, sometimes we have hard conversations with clients. Right. Do you get involved with dollars and cents, or is that something that they're kind of already set up and then they bring you in afterwards?
I like to work with people like you guys, because I don't want to talk about dollars and cents. I want you to send me people who know that their dollars and cents are in order and they want to start having those conversations about, okay, what am I going to do when I retire? How am I going to fill my time in a meaningful way? So no, I don't deal with that at all. But what I am very clear about that and say, you got to make sure that this is in order before you start going here, because it's a little chicken and egg, right? How can they tell me what they want to do if they don't know how much money they're going to have? Well, I'm like, I can't help you if you don't have money. Okay, so you need to have money to be able to retire. So get that in line, and then we can talk about how you might want to spend that money. The other thing that's interesting is I find that when people retire, maybe you guys find this too, when people retire, they're like all of a sudden they become very cheap. They don't want to spend their money. And so they say they're going to do all these things. I'm going to travel. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You think you are, but you're not. So let's be realistic about what you're going to do. So we have some of those interesting conversations.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that comes up when is exactly what you mentioned, that once the paycheck stops coming in, it is a real mindset change to accumulating, especially for high net worth individuals that maybe had, CFO jobs or CEO jobs, where they're accumulating wealth for 30, 40 years. And then suddenly the spigot turns off and they have what they have and they're good. And we can tell them, you're good. You've got more than enough. You can buy that new car. You can take that European vacation. But they're very, very reluctant to, once they're not accumulating anymore and they're in that spending phase. So that's an interesting overlap that you mentioned.
So what happened to me, I'll give you a story. What happened to me is my husband is still working, and there's some real issues associated with couples retiring also. So I do work with couples as well, and we can talk about that. But my husband is going to be working for another 10 years easily. And I stopped working, and then I didn't have a paycheck coming in, hadn't started anything that was going to make me money at that point. I had to ask for money for the first time in my, I've been working 40 some odd years. I had to ask for money. It was horrible. It was humiliating. I think probably maybe more women than men experience that. But, I'm not going to dip into my 401k to pay my car payment, right? I didn't think about any of that stuff. And it was mortifying. I got used to it, by the way, but it's still, the first time it was like, I need money. And I was like, we're going to vomit as I was saying it, to be honest with you, because I was so used to being independent. It was just another thing that I hadn't thought about. And it was a painful one.
It's funny you hear of these situations where, different couples, there are lots of different arrangements, but you may have a traditional breadwinner and a spouse that stays at home, and then the breadwinner retires, and then the spouse says, "Wait a minute, I don't want you here. Get back out there." So you must have to deal with couples sometimes too, where it's not just one party that is making decisions. There are other parties. Maybe the spouse, and maybe children may want to have a say in some of these things. So how much of an issue can that be, dealing with other family members and having to balance all these kind of conflicting opinions on what the right answer is? It's
a huge issue. And it's a huge issue because there's so many variations. So there are two people that might retire together. That's one situation, creates some issues. There's people that retire at different times. There's one that retires, one that never does, one that retires and goes back to work because they don't want to be not working. And then my favorite is the one where the husband was working, breadwinner, wife was home doing baby, kid raising and whatever, has their own life now. And suddenly the husband is following them around the house. And they're like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, do you want to have lunch today?" And they're like, "No, I don't want to have lunch. I have a life. Go find something else to do." And walking through those things, talking about them. Another big issue that I see a lot, Paul, is this expectation. Well, I'll take care of my grandkids. Your kids might have something to say about that, right? So there's these conversations that have to happen as part of this planning process. So first you have to identify what it is that's important to you. That might be nice for you, but what conversations do you have to have with the other people in your life to, make sure the expectations or boundaries or whatever you want to call them are set so that you don't give yourself, more trouble than you started with.
Yeah, I feel like the specific goals are a thing we've talked about on this podcast a lot, with the money side as well. And it seems like that's another place where the family of it all could get sensitive, right? We've certainly talked about family meetings more broadly, but, have you ever, obviously not any specifics you don't feel like sharing, but have you ever run into those kind of snags where it just, not just the emotional weight of asking for money, but the disagreement on how to budget and how to deal with those different cash flows?
Well, I could tell you a story. I won't obviously use names, but I was working with a founder whose son was also in the business. The founder, "I'm never retiring. I don't want to retire." So the son comes in and closes the door and says to me, "You got to get him out of here." I'm like, "What do you mean? I got to get him out." "You got to get him out of here. What's it going to take to get him out of here?" Right? So for the father, it was about, I don't know what I'm going to do. For the son, it was just pay him, make him go away, get him out of here, because he's blocking not only how I see myself taking over the business and how I want to run things, right? So it wasn't a personal thing. It was more around running the corporation and taking it to the next step. And Son wanted to modernize things. The father's like, we don't need a system for that. There was just all this friction. It happens all the time. And especially with founders, it's more about helping them see a life that's meaningful for them, right? And they can't sometimes see it, so they don't want to give up what they have.
Yeah. When you work with clients, do you have a large proportion who come in like that, where they're like, I don't have any vision of what's coming next at all, I'm completely blank? Or do you have some proportion who are like, oh, I kind of have an idea, but I'm not exactly sure how to go about it, or what the concrete steps are with that plan?
I think there are two groups. One is the people who have thought about it a little bit but don't know how to execute and move forward. And then I work with a lot of people who are about 6 months to a year into retirement, and they are absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
Because they were burned out. And the challenge is burnout and ready to retire look a lot alike. And in the moment, they're hard to tell apart. And so when you're 60 and you think you're ready to retire, but you're really burned out and you jump off that ladder, sadly, ageism is not dead, and it's very hard to go backwards. So really figuring out if you're burnt out or you're ready to check out, are two different things for the people who are working. Are you really ready? That's the first thing we do. Are you really ready?
Yeah.
The second thing is, okay, if you're really ready, what do you want it to look like? The people who are already retired, there's a lot of them too. Those people are in much more desperate shape. They're despondent. They've tried so many things. They've tried tennis and pickleball and pot like me, but none of them fit. And they just don't know what to do next. So helping them get to the bottom of what it is they want to spend their time doing and how that might look is what the essence of the work is. Another thing that comes up all the time is I don't have a purpose. It's my least favorite word, purpose. Like, what is a purpose? And a purpose is not a thing. People are looking for a thing. Like, where's my purpose? I don't have a purpose. They have a purpose. I don't have a purpose. I'm like, it's not a thing. It's a culmination. It's a group of things that you do to make yourself happy. And so people have to, finding that once they're already in the abyss is a challenge. And sometimes only a therapist can help. And I am not that either.
Sure.
I was about to say, it seems like you wear a lot of hats, and you may not think of yourself as a therapist, but it sounds like you are, in at least in some ways. We had another episode we recently recorded where we interviewed Jonathan Stanley, and he spoke about how the people who are most focused on their own happiness tend to be, unfortunately, some of the most unhappy people. So I got a two-part question for you, really. One, just how do you define success? I'm sure it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but how do you define success? What is kind of the sign that things are kind of reaching a conclusion or a steady state? And two, I'm also just curious, the work that's involved. Are we talking about long, continuous meetings in person, remote, phone calls, weekly, monthly? I'm just curious kind of how you structure this, because it seems like something you could go as far down the rabbit hole as one wants to, but ultimately you do want to end up reaching that goal of success, however you define it.
Well, success is defined by the client. Okay, so they come to me with a problem, a challenge, or whatever. What is success? And I always ask them, I start with, what does success look like for you? So sometimes they'll say things like, success looks like working 20 hours a week doing something, something. Success looks like being on a board. Success looks like a combination of grandkids, travel, and working part-time. It depends what their success looks like. And so that's a challenging question to answer, because everybody's idea of success is different. What I do with my clients is I take them through a series of sessions, to start with 6 sessions, and we go through a series of exercises that build on each other. I think I mentioned to Amy, I'm hopeful in January I'll be publishing a book, and in my book are these 30 exercises to help people build the retirement of their dreams, so to speak, right? So it takes them through a series of exercises that build on each other, that will answer some of those questions. Questions like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I want to do, right? So that's a big one. So there's an exercise about looking backwards to look forwards. What are the things you've done in your life that have made you the happiest and feeling, that you felt the most content with? And they're sometimes not like, it's not like playing tennis. It's more like, I've always helped people no matter where I've been, at church, at this place, at that place. okay, help people. How are we going to do that? Or how are we going to build that in, right? So we try to identify what you've done in your past that you want to bring forward into your future. That's an example of the exercises. So some people go through 2 exercises, 3 exercises, and they're like, oh, the light bulb goes on and they're good and they go off about their merry way. Sometimes they'll check in again because they'll derail, and others it takes longer. But one of the things, I don't know if any of you have read a book called Life is in the Transitions. It is an incredible book. It changed everything for me because it explained change to me, transition to me at a time when I was really falling off the cliff. And a lot of people, myself included, spend a lot of time in what's in this book called the messy middle, where they try different shoes on for size. So I did that too. I tried HR consulting and I was like, oh, now I remember why I don't want to do HR anymore. I'm not doing that anymore. I tried pottery. I found out I am not an artist. I'm not going to do that anymore. I tried paddleboarding. I'm like, I hate the water. This is probably not a good thing for me. So you try in a lot of things, but eventually you find things that fit, the shoes fit, and you build on them. Not to say they won't change over time, but that's really what we're after.
Is that a process that almost everybody has to go through, this messy middle as you describe it?
Yes. So there's the godfather of change is William Bridges. And if you read anything by him, this second book, Life is in the Transitions, is based on his work. And essentially every new beginning starts with an ending of something else. And so the process of change starts with an ending. Something is ending. So then it ends. You mourn the ending. You should have rituals to say goodbye to the ending. Like, that's why they have retirement parties and things like that. Then it ends. And then there's this transition into what we call the messy middle. And it could be a year. It could be 6 months. It could be 10 years. It just depends on how fast you can move through it. But ultimately, people settle into a new normal, a new beginning until that ends. And so with retirement, that could be, I get to the end of my messy middle, I'm really comfortable and happy, and suddenly I get ill, or my spouse gets ill, or we have to move, right? So then the transition period starts again, and you're back to the ending and into the messy middle. So if you think about change that way, we go through those transitions all the time. The thing that's interesting is that the transition is life. It's the steady state that's unusual, and it doesn't last for very long. We're usually always at some point in the transition cycle throughout our lives.
Yeah, it reminds me, earlier this season, I spoke to a college admissions professional about parents and the kids going through the college admissions process. And it just immediately made me think of that, talking about sort of, the excitement of what's next, but also sometimes the grief about the chapter that you're closing and leaving behind. And it's sometimes hard, I think, there's a societal push toward the excitement and away from the grief, which I imagine you must see all the time.
So we tend to over-index. We overestimate our happiness, right, on things, and we underestimate the things that are going to go wrong. We don't think about them, which is why a lot of people dive off, like I did, dive off the corporate ladder. I'm smart. I'll figure it out when I get there. No.
Yeah.
Right? I underestimate. I didn't even think about all of the bad stuff. I thought about the good stuff, right? But the good stuff is never as good, and the bad stuff is worse. So...
dire, but fair enough.
It's dire, but it's not. It's if you intentionally think about these things and plan for them, they're not dire. You know what's going to happen to you. As soon as I read that book, I was like, oh, thank God, I'm not crazy. But I am crazy, but not that. I'm not crazy about this. Yeah. Right. I'm going through a normal cycle, and that's really. For me, that's my mission. I don't want people to have to do what I did. I want people to think. I want your clients to think about what's going to happen to them. Not just can they pay the bills, right? What are they going to do with their time, and build an intentional retirement? Because it could look like anything you want it to look like.
I listened to you sit down with Richard Outram on his podcast recently, and the point "hope is not a plan" came up, which I immediately thought of all my coworkers here at Palisades Hudson, because it feels like, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, either Eric or Paul, but hope is not a plan feels like a thing that applies to both the retirement planning that you do and financial planning more broadly, where just kind of crossing your fingers and moving forward doesn't lead to great outcomes mostly.
That applies to everything in life. I heard that from a CEO that I worked for years ago. Somebody said, I hope this will happen. And he turns around and he goes, hope is not a plan. Where's the plan? Yeah, that's a good point.
So we've talked on episodes in this podcast in the past, probably enough that regular listeners are going to laugh for me to bring it up again. But one size fits all is kind of a myth in financial planning. And I have to imagine for you as well. When you're sitting down with a client, what is sort of the first step to figure out, like when you're doing, say, a diagnosis, to put it in medical terms, what is the first thing that you're sort of sitting down to be like, what do we need to home in on first?
So I use something called an RQ assessment. So you've heard of IQ, EQ, AQ. There's an RQ assessment that I use through the Retirement Coaches Association. That's usually a first step because it's an eye opener, because you answer a bunch of questions and it comes back with this full report on where you might be emotionally, psychologically, socially, and emotionally ready, and where you might not be. So what areas, we usually start with that, and then we focus in on those areas. At the same time, I always do the same exercise first. What does your perfect day look like? Hour by hour. For me, it's getting up at exactly 7, watching the first 15 minutes of the Today Show with my coffee in my hand, and then going to work out, and about 10 o'clock, I'm ready to work. If somebody wants an 8:30 meeting, my answer is no. You know, my point is really thinking about what brings you joy day to day. What do you want your day to look like during the week, on the weekends? And it quickly becomes clear where the gaps are for people, right? Where do they need to focus?
Sure. You don't have 2 to 4 p.m. follow my wife around the house asking her.
Or 2 to 4 p.m. happy hour every single day. That's a problem.
That's encouraging to hear that one of the main questions is what does a day look like? That's a question that I ask a lot of clients when, usually I know that retirement, it's time to start thinking about and talking about retirement when they bring it up. If they don't bring it up, then it's not on their mind, and it may be years down the road. But the second they start using the R word, I hear that, and I know that, all right, it's time to start having some different conversations. And that's one of my first questions is just, do you have any idea of what a day looks like and the day after that? And sometimes they're like, absolutely, I know, I can't wait. Sometimes they say, I have no idea, it's going to be terrible. So you can kind of see what the answer is, how much work there is going to be for them to get ready for when the time comes. Is there, a question number 2 or question number 3, you think that also are, super important to kind of gauge, just where someone is at with all of this?
I think that the second one after the perfect day is socially. What does your network look like? Because many people, myself included, when I left work, I left a lot of my friends. And my other friends, my mom friends, or whatever you want to call them, had moved on. Right? They already had their activities and their social groups, etc. And I also moved away. So I'm not as close physically to them as I was. So social network is the second thing we work on, because that is also the thing. People get very lonely in retirement if they don't have these social networks built up. So I'd say that's number 2. Of course, if you're married and you've got the whole couple situation is probably number 2 if you've got that going on as well. And then social would be number 3. So
do you feel that people tend to oversuggest volunteering as a panacea for retirement? I feel, not to knock it, Paul and I have talked about philanthropy and both strongly believe in it for people who are moved by it. But I feel like as someone who encounters this kind of writing about retirement regularly, it feels like everyone is just like, that will fix everything.
Okay. So for starters, there's a rule. If you didn't do something before retirement, you're not going to do it when you retire. So my favorite is, I'm going to work out. I'm like, no, you're not. You didn't work out before, you're not going to work out now, right? Yeah. You're not. I mean, you might eventually build that habit, but if it's not your habit before, it's not going to be your habit when you retire. So same with philanthropy, right? If you weren't volunteering before, it's not going to be so easy to go find those volunteer opportunities. The other thing I would tell you about volunteer opportunities is those organizations, and I went down this road myself, they want your money and they want your hands. They don't want your head. They don't want your ideas. They don't want leaders. They want doers. Okay, so if you want to go and do those things, literally pack bags, tutor children, okay. But if you want to be on the board, or you want to take a leadership role, or you want to have more of an impact at a higher level, you got to be involved in those things before you retire, because they're not interested in you afterwards. The same is true with board seats. I have a lot of CEOs. I'm going to be on boards. I'm like, no, you're not. Not unless you arrange for those things beforehand, because once it's like when you drive your car, this is terrible. When you drive your car off the lot, it immediately loses its value. When the CEO leaves, they immediately lose their value. Not all of it, but there's a depreciation. And when they go to get onto boards or they go to do these other things, people are like, well, he's kind of old school, or he's not relevant anymore, or he doesn't know the latest and greatest. So what I tell people is, if that's something you think you want to do, got to start building those blocks before you leave.
So we've just sort of touched on how there's no one size fits all answers for anyone, but I'm going to turn around and ask you, you mentioned already a book, which I will link in our show notes, and your book, which by the time this airs should be out, so I'll link that as well. But do you have any tools or resources that you find are really broadly applicable that you're always pointing people towards?
So the book I told you about is one I point people towards often. The RQ assessment is another one that it's not an expensive tool. I point people to it. You don't need a coach to do it. You can do it online.
Yeah.
It's helpful to work with a coach when you do it, so you interpret it correctly and know what to do with it. That's part of the challenge. I do on my website have like a really extensive 50 pages of tools.
Yeah.
But things like, senior living. What is the difference between senior living types of places? What should you ask or consider for if you think you want to do that? So I have some tools and resources out there. There's not a lot out there. One thing I want to make sure to mention is, because I'm sure you guys will see this, is that a lot of people who are retired and unhappy don't talk about it. They don't talk about it because it's like a first world problem. Who complains about not working? Sure. What an ingrate. You're so lucky you don't have to work and you're complaining. So people tend to be quiet about it. And then they go searching online for resources, like I did, resources and coaches, because anybody I tried to talk to looked at me like, you're not working? What's wrong with that? Like, what? So there's not a lot out there, and you have to really dig and try to find it yourself. So,
yeah. To that point, do you connect with people largely because they find you online? Is there a lot of sort of word of mouth referral, or as you said, is it a thing people don't want to talk about as much with their peers?
I think word of mouth, because eventually people go digging. So for me, I found this woman that I ended up being my coach. I found her digging online. I found a women's group for retired executive women.
Okay.
I don't know. I just happened on it. She happened to be on there, right? So word of mouth is one way. And then people write about this stuff. Things like Substack, which is how I got it. I mean, I don't know if you guys are on Substack, but it's blowing up. And it's mostly writers, and it's people out there sharing things. So somebody reads your Substack and they go, oh, I got to talk to you, right? But it's haphazard. People find each other different ways. And again, people are embarrassed that they are blessed, but not,
Yeah, we're just getting our feet wet at Palisades Hudson with the Substack pool. We started that up this year.
It's the best.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, yours is called The Next Edit. I was just curious, how did you land on the name for your Substack newsletter?
Okay, you're going to laugh. Me and my best friend, Claude, I talked to ChatGPT and Claude, and then I played them off against each other. And I said, I like this, I don't like that. The modern way of doing things. And I just liked the way it sounded. It's an edit. Life is an edit. Every phase of your life is an edit. It doesn't have to be a redo. It could be just a tweak.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it with the transition and change theme that you were hitting on before. I think that's a nice way to tie it all in.
Yeah.
And speaking of the modern way of doing things, I was just thinking about trends, retirement and, retirement 50 years ago looks different than it does today. Yeah. And it's going to look different again in the future. Although it's hard to it's not something I've put a lot of thought into. I don't know what it might look like in the future. Maybe we're just watching screens. But do you have thoughts on trends and what this might evolve and continue to look like in the future?
So I just finished a 5-part series on The Next Edit. Sorry, I don't mean to be saying that, but on how AI is going to impact retirement. And some very interesting, I think, trends in social, right? People are falling in love with their AIs, but let's not go with that. People are, talking to their AI. AI is remembering things for people who have memory issues. They're helping them take medication. There's all kinds of things. My by far favorite, but weird, is you can upload your voice and you can answer questions. I don't know if you guys have heard of Storyworthy. It's an AI tool out there where you send to your parents. I am lucky. I have 92 and a 91-year-old parent.
Yeah.
And I sent them all these questions and they answered them in their own voice. And now they're up there and my kids can access it. You can train AI to answer questions. So when you're gone, your kids can ask you a question and you can answer in your voice. It's kind of weird, but they won't think it's weird. There are so many ways that AI is going to impact aging in general and retirement in particular. Those are just two examples, the social one and the longevity one, or the legacy one, if you will. But there's a lot of others. Check it out. I wrote 5 posts on it.
It makes me think, you said earlier how you have to have the right habits in place. We may have some sad listeners hearing that if you didn't work out when you were working, you're not going to do it in retirement either.
Hold on.
And there's hope. There's always hope. But AI may be the same thing, like for people that are nearing the end of their work careers and thinking, I don't need to learn this, I'll be gone by the time it's really widespread. No, like you're saying, it could be very useful in that next chapter.
Yeah, it is extremely useful. But I think older people are scared of technology, which is partially what makes them irrelevant, right? When they have, again, 91 and 92-year-old parents. My dad can do anything technical. I mean, it's unbelievable. The guy had the first cell phone. It was like a brick.
Yeah.
Okay. But now he does his router. He's like, people call him for tech support. He's in assisted living and he's the tech support for all the people there. They can't figure out how to, where should I put, So if you stay relevant, you will be relevant. And I think it's important not to be scared of it. And that's, another message for listeners. It's coming, whether you like it or not. Embrace it and see where it takes you.
Yeah. I mean, I think of even just, 10, 15 years ago, the rise of social media, which, we probably don't have enough time left in the podcast to get all into the intricacies, but how much that can make a difference as far as the social networks you were talking about earlier. The ability to connect to people, even if you can't physically see them, opens a lot of doors, I think, for people who might find getting around harder as they get further and further into their aging. I've seen that with people in my own life versus people who are sort of either scared of or intimidated by, you sort of lose that door closes a little bit for them. So
some of the people I'm closest to now that I met during COVID, we're all on Zoom. They don't live in my part of the country. Some of them I've never met in person, but we talk every week. We have scheduled Zoom calls, so we trade ideas. So I think it's about finding community any way you can, and technology makes that easier as you get older. Especially if you live alone or you want to age in place, right? You have these options that you didn't have before. So,
yeah. Circling back to a thing you said at the beginning of the episode, the intimidation of the blank schedule. It just made me think, and I was wondering, is it really a temperament difference, or how important do you find it is for your clients to have some sort of regimented rhythm, things that happen over and over in their lives without work to sort of impose that on them?
I would say it is hugely important to have a structure. Doesn't have to be the same thing every single day, but to have a structure. So that perfect day I was talking about, right? Every day I wake up, I do the same thing. Right? What happens after 10 o'clock? I mean, it could be a client, could be something else, could meet a friend for lunch. Things change, but I have a basic structure, whatever that is, for the week. And then I have a different one on the weekends. And it gives me, it provides meaning, right? I know I have to be someplace. Somebody is expecting me, or I have, things that I know I do. You mentioned if you're not going to work out, you're not going to work out. Habits are habits are a big part of life, right? Building a habit takes a long time, but once you build it, it sticks and it makes your life feel like it has stickiness. It's got a routine, which is necessary. It doesn't have to be the same every time, but every day. But having that basic really helps people feel grounded and connected. And that's really a big piece of what is missing when you stop work. Work dictated everything about my life. When I got up, when I ate my meals, when I went to sleep, right? When I got to watch TV, when I got to go to my kids' soccer game, like everything about my life was dictated by work. And when you pull it out, you just flounder. Most people do.
Yeah, it just made me think of, obviously not the same in a lot of really important ways, but a lot of us faced during lockdown, I think, for COVID, where, even those of us who are lucky enough to keep our jobs, you're no longer getting dressed, you're no longer going to the office, you're just in your place, and suddenly a lot of that external structure just evaporated for you.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of that in different places. Right. So we have a whole generation, and I talk about this a lot with executives, CEOs. We have a whole generation of young people that don't know how to have a conversation. They don't know how to look you in the eye. They don't know how to shake your hand when they walk in a room, because my younger son started his job from his bed. Right. I mean, so getting young people back into the office to start building some of these skill sets. Work is not the same for them as it is for my generation and probably your generation. It wasn't the same. It's not the same glue. So when they retire, it'll be a whole different experience.
So returning listeners to the podcast will know that I usually like to wrap up an episode by giving the guests the final word. So since my colleagues knew this was coming, I'll start with them. Eric, I'll ask you first. Did you have any last questions for Andrea, or any sort of final thoughts about retirement that you wanted to leave our listeners with today?
Well, I really found our conversation fascinating in that we always look at the financial aspect of it, right? And Paul and I have worked for a long time helping shepherd clients through this transition, but it's always been from such a financial point of view that we do sometimes get involved with the playing therapist and the emotional side. But I've often found that what you said was true, is that people keep it quiet. And I think it's great what you're doing in shining a light on difficulties that people have in this transition. I mean, I'm coming away from this a little worried myself after hearing.
Well, you know how to find me, Eric.
Yeah, I might be calling you in a decade or so.
See? I bet it's going to be sooner than a decade. See, you're doing it already.
Yeah, well, I've got a lot to learn on this topic, because all I think about is the portfolio. So thank you for teaching us about this.
My pleasure.
And Paul, I'll kick it to you. Same question. Do you have any final thoughts or anything to ask Andrea before we wrap up today?
I think this is something that there's more and more growing awareness about the importance of this kind of work and preparation. I've had clients tell me that they have engaged a retirement coach, and I say that is great. I think it's kind of like a heads I win, tails I break even proposition. I think, best case, you are going to make the transition so much better for yourself. Worst case, maybe it was going to be okay in the first place. But I've seen firsthand people who retirement can be abrupt. It can be a shock, and it can be just a very negative experience. And it can take years to kind of dig out of that hole. And so I think this is a profession that is growing and should continue to grow. It's a first world problem in some cases, but I think it's going to just continue to be a more and more of a widespread issue for many people in this country and the world. And so, yeah, I'm a fan. I need to work out more. I'm learning, but I'm really glad that I was part of this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, first world problems are still problems, which, is embarrassing for people, but it's true. It doesn't make them go away. So, Andrea, I'll let you wrap us up here today. Do you have any final thoughts to leave our listeners with at the end of this conversation?
I most definitely do.
Yeah.
You guys on this call are on the front line of this fight. Help your clients, ask them questions, suss out the ones that are not happy, right? And help them. Because you're the front line, because you're the one they talk to about retirement, and if they're not happy or it's not going well. So ask them questions, push them in a different direction, and think about how you can provide some of this guidance for them, even if it's only pushing them towards a coach or pointing them towards a book or a website. You guys, you're the front line. So think about how maybe you can add this to your toolkit for them.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to all three of you for sitting down with me today. I found this a really fascinating conversation, even though I'm a ways away from needing it myself. And I hope our listeners found it helpful to know that there's help out there to seek, to know what some of those resources are, and maybe look into your Substack, which we will definitely link in the show notes. So thank you so much. It was great talking to you about this important topic.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Something Personal is a production of Palisades Hudson Financial Group, a financial planning and investment firm headquartered in South Florida. Our other offices are in Atlanta, Austin, the Portland, Oregon metropolitan area, and the New York City metro area. Something Personal is hosted by me, Amy Liberta. Our producers are Ali Elkin and Joseph Rangeli. Joseph Rangeli is also our director, editor, and mixer. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us wherever you're listening. It's a simple way to help new listeners find the show, and we really do appreciate it. Thank you.